Part 1. 5 Minutes. My name is Dorothy Mae Caldwell, though folks around Lidditz just call me Dot. I'm 74, and I'm writing this from a porch that smells like coffee and fresh sawdust. There's a cigar box of carving knives beside my elbow, a battered transistor muttering baseball, and a row of half-painted cardinals drying on clothespins. That's the life I built. But you wanted the first strike, not the aftermath. Fine. Here it is, quick and straight. I was born across the river in Camden, 1951, in a skinny row house where the floor tilted and the kitchen linoleum sweated in July. Mom, Lydia, took in laundry at the church basement. Dad, Ray Caldwell, hauled frozen sides of beef in a rattling Chevy with a refrigeration unit that coughed like a smoker. My brother, Caleb, copied Ray's walk by age 9. My sister, June, memorized hinges and handholds for when a door might slam. We counted money in recipes. Rent was 3 loaves and a bag of potatoes. Coal was 2 loaves and a sack of onions. Night shifts did Ray in. First came tips for speed. Then came bottles dressed in torn labels and a TV that never stopped yelling about boxing. Windows started bleeding glitter every Friday. Glass shards in the sink, glass in the cuffs of school sweaters. Mom learned to stitch under other women's names so Ray wouldn't sniff out extra pay. He lectured, loudly, about respect. He demonstrated it with his fists. I stayed at school late because the shop smelled like cedar, not beer. Mrs. Green ran the woodroom, a wiry woman with a pencil behind each ear and glue on her knuckles. She pressed a dull chisel into my hand and pushed a small block my way. Notch the beak, Dot. Birds are triangles pretending to be circles. I carved a blue jay that looked like a crooked boat and kept going until it looked like a bird. At the county fair, I won a ribbon and a letter, an invitation to show my work in Philadelphia. I flattened that letter into the insole of my old Keds and thought I'd outsmarted the house. Caleb found it. He waved the paper like a flag at the dinner table. Ray grinned without humor, fed the letter into the oven door, and shut it with his hip. Girls iron. They don't run lathes. My templates went into the trash with the potato peels. That night, I didn't cry. I inventoried. 2 streetcar tokens in the sugar jar. 53 cents under the stove leg. A church thrift tin that used to hold salt, now holding 4 wrinkled singles. A phone book with a bus timetable circled in pencil. June, 12 and quick, learned to keep watch. Mom stacked quarters between the flour sack and the vinegar because Ray never reached there. The kitchen was women's territory, and he mistook that for a force field. In June of '67, Ray tried to lift a crate of ice alone and wrench something he couldn't curse back into place. The clinic strapped him into a knee-back brace, metal uprights, leather bands, little round joints that needed oil. We suddenly owned a brown bottle of clear lubricant that lived in the bathroom cabinet and smelled like menthol and machine shop. When he greased the hinge and sighed, the house rested for a minute. I found the answer at a hobby store off Broadway. A 2-tube epoxy for ship models, resin in one, hardener in the other. Does it hold metal? I asked the clerk. If you mix it right, he said, it holds the ocean. I paid $3.20 and slid the kit into the lining of my coat. I didn't plan a speech. I planned minutes. We waited for a Saturday with noise to hide small sounds. By noon, Ray had started on whiskey. Caleb dragged in 2 chucklers from the garage and turned the TV up until the announcer sounded like a horn. Mom cooked eggs in a pan with the handle snapped off, holding it with a pot holder because her wrist was bruised. Ray complained about a soft knee and that blessed oil. At 4 in the morning, the house went heavy and still. The hallway bulb flickered like a tired blink. Mom took up a post outside the bathroom, towel in hand, as if she were just there to tidy. I opened the cabinet. The bottle was where it always sat, shy of the edge by a finger's width. I twisted the cap, mixed resin and hardener in the little lid until the swirl turned a uniform shine, then tipped a thread of it back into the bottle and rolled the neck between my fingers so nothing dripped. I wiped the rim, set it down in the exact ring of dust it had made, and slid the sticky mixing stick into a paper twist, then into my robe pocket. My hands smelled like walnuts in chemistry. We owned a plan measured in seconds, not speeches. No chanting, no oaths. Just 5 clean moves. Replace, wait, pack, walk, ride. At 6:10, the radio gave the weather. At 6:20, the brace straps rasped. At 6:23, the cap clicked. At 6:25, a curse rattled the bedroom door. At 6:26, a chair scraped hard. At 6:27, the hallway took a body. That sound, bone, metal, floor, was final. He lay flat, one leg locked straight as a fence post, the brace hinges seized. He grabbed for the end table. The little metal foot skated. His forehead met the corner with a thud and a red line opened. "Phone the doctor, you useless hens," he barked, voice blowing spit. Mom didn't move. 5 minutes, she said. Not to him, to me. We'd practiced this without practicing. I went to the kitchen. Flour sack up, salt tin out, money into my pocket. From the gap behind the stove, documents rolled in butcher paper, birth certificates, insurance stubs, the deed to nothing but proof we existed. Behind the stovepipe, the spare key to the church mailbox, where Mom had once stashed $3 more in a blank envelope. June was already in her coat with the postcard she'd written herself days ago. Pearl Hansen, Honesdale, PA, tucked into her sleeve. Ray tried to crawl to the phone, but the cord was short. It had been short since I fixed it months before. "Caleb!" he roared, but my brother slept under a pile of empty bottles and sports commentary. Mom stepped past Ray and paused at the family photograph, him sober, us small, and left it hanging. "No," she said, simple as a snapped thread. I checked the clock. 6:32. The bus on Market Street left at 6:50 on Saturdays. We could make that if our feet behaved. We didn't run. Running is loud. We pulled the door soft against the jamb and walked down the stoop into air that tasted like cold pennies. The street was empty except for a milk truck. We turned the corner, then another, then crossed under the dead theater sign. The station man tore our bills in half with a rubber stamp and pushed 3 tickets through the window without looking up. We sat 2 rows from the back facing forward because forward is easier. Ray's house shrank behind diesel smoke. Camden fell away in slices. Row houses, rail yard, glittering river. June tightened her scarf. Mom counted nothing in her lap and tucked the empty hands into her sleeves. I lifted my heel and felt the hollow where that first invitation letter used to live, and I understood what shoes are for. Pearl opened her Onsdale door in a robe and said only, "Kitchen, bath, bed, talk later." She had chickens, a square yard, and a backbone like rebar. Later would come, factory work for Mom, night sweeping at the school for me, a mop handle, a ring of keys, the shop's clean light, the principal who said, "Show me the bird," and the door that cracked open again. But you asked for the beginning. Here it is. a bottle in a cabinet, a measured pour, a sequence, a bruise you don't photograph, a bus you catch by minutes, and a life that starts because someone finally chose 5 steps over 5 more years. And if you're waiting for remorse, you'll wait a long time. I don't hoard feelings. I stack actions. Mix, swap, wait, gather, go. That morning, we took exactly 5 minutes. The rest took a lifetime. Part 2. No looking back. Pearl didn't ask for stories. She issued instructions. Shoes off on the mat. Hot water's fickle. Turn left for heat. Right to keep skin. Her house smelled like apples and floor polish. She fed us oatmeal so thick the spoon stood upright and then marched me to the shed. A bench, a vise, a coffee can of bent nails, the holy rattle of real tools. If you stay, she said, you'll earn your keep with your hands. By dusk, I had a blister and a plan. The Onsdale school needed a night cleaner. I took the shift, keys clipping my hip, pushing a mop while math ghosts clung to chalkboards. The shop room tugged me like tide. I polished the bandsaw, squared the fence, and left a note on the teacher's desk. Saw aligned. Dot. In the morning, Mr. Rowland found me rolling dust from the planer bed with adhesive paper. You run a shop? He asked. I run away from mess, I said. Same skill, he said, handing me a proper push stick. 3 nights later, he tested me with a crooked stool. I rehoused the joints, added a stretcher, and eased the edges so pant legs wouldn't snag. He sat, bounced. Hold up your hands, he said. I did. Steady. Fine. We can build on that. He didn't pat my shoulder or ask about home. He made a list. Broom hooks, a rack for clamps, a cradle for scraps sorted by species. I built them all before Sunday. Pearl drilled other things. Bank account. In your name. We went to First National. The teller looked at my skinned knuckles like they were credentials and slid me a booklet. Sign here. The pen scratched clean. Proof I existed began to stack. News traveled like smoke. A boy from Camden passed through with a cousin. His mother knew our street. Ray went down hard, he said. Brace locked, stitches, a crutch, and a foul mouth. He watched me for flinch. I had none to spare. And Caleb? I asked. Drifted. Ohio, maybe. Drift was his talent. I learned Honesdale by foot. Bakery at 6, hardware at 7, shop at 8, school at night. In between, I carved. Pearl's chickens watched, heads ticking, while I roughed cardinals from maple blocks and found their faces by subtraction. On Saturdays, we sold eggs and birds at a folding table by the church. People touched the carvings like they were warm. The beak, one man said. That angle feels right. He handed me $3. I put it in the bank, not my pocket. One afternoon, a Chevy with a mismatched door idled across the street. Caleb leaned against the hood, cigarette low, grin higher than his sense. You really ran, he said, as if I'd skipped class, not war. Pearl stepped onto the porch with a broom held like a standard. We left, she corrected. There's a difference. He eyed the yard, the chickens, the table with birds, a life where his name didn't open anything. Dad wants you back, he said to Mom, who stood inside the screen with her hands tucked. He wants control, Pearl said. We've canceled that account. Caleb's eyes flicked to me. You did something, he said. He says the brace seized like it got glued. I let the porch boards carry my weight. Sometimes metal locks when it's tired, I said. Sometimes men do. He spat in the gravel. You always talked fancy. He didn't remember. I talked in measurements, not metaphors. He tried the screen door. Pearl set the broom bristles on his boot. "Leave," she said. "You got 2 minutes to be smart." He laughed, but his laugh wobbled. Smart wasn't his reflex. He backed off to the car. "You think he won't find you?" "I don't think about him at all," Mom said through the mesh, and shut the wooden door slow, as if sealing a jar. Caleb drove away crooked, like a sentence with the wrong ending. Roland found me later planing a maple slab to the whisper point. "That boy trouble?" he asked. "He's a visitor," I said. "We don't accept returns." He tapped the board. "Keep the plane moving, or you'll gouge." I did. Shavings peeled off in long ribbons that curled like question marks and fell as answers. Work built a rhythm that didn't need persuasion. I opened the shop before sunup, checked belts, oiled bearings, real oil, and lined students' projects on the rack by progress. Squared, joined, sanded. The bandsaw sang. The room smelled like clean heat. Kids showed up sleepy and left with boxes that held nails and pride. I said little. Measure twice. Sneak up on the line. If it chatters, you're forcing it. If it burns, you're lazy. They nodded. Some listened. A letter arrived addressed to me, care of the school. A state vocational contest in Scranton. Category woodcraft. Functional. I took it to Pearl. "Enter," she said. "Don't ask permission from ghosts." I built a dovetailed toolbox with a sliding till and a handle you wanted to touch. I mitered the corners tight enough to keep secrets and cut the dovetails by hand, because machines brag where hands just get it done. I lined the bottom with canvas. I burned my name small under the handle. DMC. At the fair, the judges poked and hummed. A boy with a lathe-turned bowl won first. Fine. I took second and a $50 check. Roland shook it once like it was rattles and said, "That'll buy proper chisels." It did. The blades came wrapped in oiled paper that felt like ceremony. The past tried one more door. A letter with no return address, the handwriting jagged as fence wire. "You stole from me. You'll crawl back when you're hungry." It wasn't signed, but ink can stink. I slid it into the stove and closed the door. Fire has good taste. Pearl drove a stick shift like it owed her rent. On Sundays, she taught me on back roads. Clutch, gas, listen. "Engines talk," she said. "Don't fight them. Stay in the same sentence." After a month, I took the test. Hands dry, eyes steady. The examiner yawned until I parallel parked in one clean swing. Then he sat up. "Where'd you learn?" "In a life that doesn't allow do-overs," I said. He stamped pass like he enjoyed it. Mom's back straightened new degrees. She hemmed choir robes at the kitchen table and stopped flinching at footsteps. June pinned her hair and practiced speeches into a spoon. Debate club, not excuses. We slept with windows open. Quiet came in and found chairs. Then the phone rang at school while I was cutting a mortise. The secretary waved me out, her face tucked into concern. "Hospital," she said, and I didn't ask which. You always know. "Head injury worsened," the voice said. "Kin should come." My hands were clean. I checked anyway. Roland stood in the doorway, eye steady, no tilt toward pity. "Do you need a ride?" he asked. "I need to choose," I said. I hung up. I walked back to the mortiser and finished the last pass. When the chisel cleared, the wood square and true, I shut the machine down and listened to the blade spin itself quiet. Then I wiped the bed, wrote 2 instructions on the whiteboard, and took the long way home along the river. At Pearl's table, I said, He's failing. Mom folded her hands, not ringing, just counting knuckles. June watched my face. Pearl poured coffee. The question isn't, can you go, she said. The question is, will it change anything you've already measured? I looked at my hands. Nicks, a scar, a line of walnut stain that never quite washed out. The answer sat there like a tool you trust. No, I said. Then eat, Pearl said. Work after. We didn't go. We sent a prayer shaped like a breath. A week later, a postcard from a neighbor arrived. Service small. He left angry. The card smelled like cheap ink and lilies. We set it under the leg of a wobbly chair until I fixed the chair. Then we threw the card out. You want drama. I give you load paths. You want revenge. I give you function that outlives the force applied to it. The house in Camden collapsed under its own weight. We built a frame here with square corners and enough bracing to carry weather. That is not poetry. That is survival. By winter, I had a corner in the Honesdale market with a proper sign. Caldwell Wood. I sold birds, boxes, small stools, a cutting board that wouldn't warp if you treated it right. People paid and came back. Roland set aside a key to the shop for me, off hours, and stopped pretending it was just cleanup. Teach an evening class, he said. Basic joinery. No speeches. Good, I said. I don't give those. That's the chapter you asked for. No wobble, no backstory tar. We didn't look over shoulders. We picked up the tool nearest to hand and used it correct. When the day ended, the floor was swept, the blades were oiled, and the doors were locked from the inside. The past can shout through windows. We put in storm panes. Part 3. Return cut. The first snow arrived like sawdust in a cold shop. Quiet, everywhere, hard to sweep. I chalked a line across the week. Market work in the mornings, school shop at night, and one trip I'd been postponing. Camden needed closing. Not for memories, for paperwork. The house sat under Ray's name. Unpaid taxes would snake back to Mom. Pearl slid a manila envelope across the table. Deed copies. Bus times. Don't linger. I left before dawn with a thermos and a pry bar wrapped in canvas. June pressed a note into my pocket. Her debate schedule, as if that would anchor me. The river wore a skin of ice. In Camden, our block looked smaller, like someone had washed it hot. The porch step where I used to sit with a bruised shin had sagged into a grin. I fit the old key, breathed once, and pushed the door. The smell hit. Stale beer, mouse, a sweetness lilies can't hide even months later. I didn't pace rooms. I walked the route a bill collector would take. Kitchen drawers, bread box, behind the stove. I pulled the phone cord free from the wall, short to the last, and coiled it out of habit. In the bedroom, a dresser drawer stuck on a nail. I slid a putty knife along the bottom, freed it, and found a tin of quarters, a stack of pink slips, and a photo of Ray in a suit before the rot. I left the photo. Quarters went into the manila. In the hall closet, a floorboard lifted with a coin and presented me with a cigar box. Inside, pawn tickets, a ring flattened to nothing, and the letter I'd won years ago, charred on one edge, saved by accident when the oven door didn't shut tight. I slid it into my coat. Papers were what I came for. Sentiment is a tool you use rarely. Footsteps banged the porch. Caleb. You can tell kin by the way a house braces. He pushed in without knock, saw me at the closet, and smirked like a man who thinks he invented doors. Came for souvenirs, he said. Came to keep the county from eating us, I said. He looked thinner. Anger doing the work food should. Dad's gone, he said, as if delivering fresh news could change the last months. The world owes me. The world pays invoices, I said. You got any? He snatched the envelope. I took it back with my left hand and stepped once to put the dining table between us. He laughed, quick and ugly. He said you glued him. I met his eyes and let the silence be the whole answer. Caleb reached for my sleeve. I didn't flinch. He tugged. The fabric didn't give. I double-stitched it weeks ago for exactly this kind of moment. You're made of angles, he said. Corners cut people. Only if they run into them, I said. He tried one more gambit. Mom needs me. Mom needs rent paid and peace, I said. You offer which? He didn't answer. He shoved past, grabbed Ray's ashtray like an heirloom, and stormed out. The front door bounced off the wall, left a new crater in old plaster, and swung shut as if relieved. In the basement, I found what I really wanted. A lockbox welded shut with neglect. The combination sticker had peeled to a ghost. I steadied it on a concrete block and used the pry bar like a patient argument. Edge under lip, lean, reset, lean. It sighed open. Inside lay the mortgage book, a paid-off stamp from 15 years back, and a folded page, a pawn ticket for Mom's ring. The shop name still existed. I tucked the ticket with the rest. The ring wasn't our future, but people deserved their circles returned. I left the house bare and legal. On the way to the bus, I stopped at the pawn shop, slid the ticket across, and counted out what was required. The man brought the ring in a smudged cotton pouch. It was thinner than it had been on Mom's finger, but metal remembers shapes if you're gentle. I put it on my smallest finger and kept it there till Honesdale. Pearl didn't ask what I saw. I laid out papers, the ring, and the single quarter that had fallen into my boot. Mom lifted the band, rolled it once, then set it on the table like a washer you'll need later. Cooking at 6, she said. We'll eat what we have. That night the shop was warm from the day's work, and the lights hummed like company. I taught basic joinery to 12 people who'd never touched a chisel with intent. A nurse, a mailman, 2 teenagers, a mechanic whose hands smelled like winter. Find the line, I said. Not your idea of the line, the real one. They cut to it, or near it, and sanded the rest. We made a box each with honest corners. I didn't talk about childhood. I talked about grain. Roland rolled in a set of pew ends in February. The church had cracked them when they dragged the benches across tile. Fix, don't hide, he said. I scarfed in new oak, matched stain by eye, and left the join line proud by a whisper, on purpose. Why the lip? He asked. So the repair speaks, I said. Silence is for damage. On a Tuesday, I met Emmett Norton. He arrived with a straight edge longer than his truck bed and a face that didn't ask for applause. He was hired to refit the sanctuary floor. I was there to return the pews at full strength. We measured in parallel, spoke only nouns and numbers. At lunch, he said, Your scarf joints are clean. I said, Your subfloor hits level. He brought coffee the next day, the kind you drink because it's hot, not because it's good. That's collaboration. Caleb's second visit came with snowmelt. He had a new bruise under one eye and a new idea in his mouth. There's cash from Dad's comp, he said, lingering by Pearl's fence. We split. We all breathe. No, Pearl said from the porch without standing. He flicked a glance at me. You always think you're above family. I'm next to the work, I said. Come stand here if you want something real. He left spitting words I didn't save. The next morning the chickens were out, gate swinging, the latch lifted by a hand that didn't know how to close things. We gathered hens, fixed hinge screws that someone had loosened on purpose, and Pearl said, "He's clumsy with malice." I set a second latch high, too simple to notice, too sure to fail. Spring landed all at once. Market foot traffic doubled. I added a new product. Cutting boards laminated from maple and cherry, end grain up, so knives kissed and didn't scar. Board butter in jelly jars, just mineral oil and beeswax I warmed on Pearl's stove. They sold because I told buyers exactly how to keep them alive. Wash quick, dry up right, oil when dull. People like instructions that work. June stood on a stage and argued a bill into shape with a voice that didn't shake. Mom wore the ring. I put up a hand-lettered sign in the shop. No drama in the cut path. Students read it and quit apologizing for trying. Then came a thin envelope from a Philadelphia gallery, forwarded by Roland. Someone had seen my toolbox at the vocational fair and wanted 3 functional objects for a summer show. I built a bench with a bridle joint that locked without nails, a wall shelf that hung on a French cleat, and a small prayer stool that folded but never pinched a finger. I burned DMC under each. Emmett loaded them in his truck like glass. At the opening, city people touched wood like it might bite. A woman in a black dress said, "The joints are honest." I said, "They're strong." She smiled without teeth. "Same thing," she said. On the drive home, the radio whispered storm warnings. Emmett drove with 2 fingers on the wheel and the other hand open on the bench seat like a place to set a tool. "You ever go back?" he asked. "Only to remove nails the right way," I said. He nodded. "Good policy." When we turned onto Pearl's Road, the sky split. Lightning walked the ridge. The shop window glowed the wrong color. Moving, orange, hungry. Fire. We were out of the truck before it stopped. Pearl had the hose already unwound. I shouldered the nozzle and hit the doorway hard. Low sweep, steam screaming. Emmett kicked the side door to vent, then hauled out what he could reach. Clamps, the grinder, a crate of chisels. Smoke bit clean. The fire took the rag bin and reached for the bench. I herded it back with water and language my grandmother wouldn't have liked. Rain hit finally and helped. In 20 minutes, the worst was dead, the rest sulking. We stood in mud and ash and watched the last flames bow. "Lamp?" Pearl asked. "Rag bin," I said. "And someone who wants heat without getting burned." Emmett squatted, held up a half-melted lighter. Not electrical. On the sill, a boot print that matched nothing we owned. Size 11, heel worn to the outside. I didn't say Caleb's name. I didn't have to. We worked till dawn. I wiped rust bloom from plane irons with oil, set clamps open to dry, hung cords, propped windows. Emmett rehung the door square. Pearl brewed coffee that tasted like Victory's burnt cousin. Mom brought quilts to cover what we couldn't move. June wrote a list on a grocery bag. Replace rags with metal bin. Mount extinguisher by both doors. Lock cabinet for solvents. Camera above the back step. Roland arrived at 7 with a van full of students who wanted to help. I put them to work. Sweep, sort, sand smoke off what smoke spared. They did. People came by the market that week and bought everything that didn't smell like ash. Some pressed bills into my palm and said, "For the shop," and left before I could argue. Emmett built me a new bench top from hard maple, and notched it for my vice without measuring twice because he didn't need to. He left his straight edge leaning in the corner. "I'll fetch it when you're too busy to notice," he said. The night after the fire, I slept. Not from exhaustion, from completion. The past had sent a flare. We answered with water and a better lock. Revenge is a blunt chisel. Repair is the right one. Next class, I wrote a new line on the board. "When the cut goes wild, back up and take a cleaner pass." The room nodded. So did I. Part 4. Trip line. The shop smelled like wet oak and new promises. We'd swapped the rag bin for a steel can with a spring lid, bolted 2 extinguishers chest high, and hung a small camera above the back step with a wire that didn't invite teeth. Emmett planed the new benchtop true. I burned DMC into the tail end and went back to work like the fire had been a bad sentence we'd edited out. Caleb doesn't edit. He repeats. 2 weeks after the blaze, scraps started moving overnight. First a box of offcuts, then a coil of extension cord, then a roll of sandpaper gone as if mice ate grit. Pearl said, "He's testing gates." I said, "We'll test back." I built a simple trip line. Not wire. Bright twine, knee height, tied to a cowbell Pearl swore by. I hung the bell behind the side door, low enough to ring, high enough to confuse. Emmett added his piece. Planer shavings raked into a light fan across the entry. "Footprints tell stories," he said. We set the camera to save to Pearl's old television. No cloud, no passwords, just a blinking red dot and a line of truth on tape. I left the shop at 10 and killed only the lights that didn't matter. Predators like darkness. Fools like light they think they control. Pearl set a cup of tea by the window. We waited without looking like we were waiting. Just before midnight, the bell spoke. 3 quick, jittery notes, and then silence that sounded guilty. I was across the yard in 4 steps. Emmett 2 behind me. Side door, open an inch. The shavings held a print. Size 11. Heel chewed on the outside. Inside, the aisle showed a smear where a boot scuffed and stopped. Caleb was halfway to the tool wall, hand out, gaze on the chisels like a raccoon considers chicken wire. He froze when he saw me, then tried on a grin that had expired last year. "Thought you'd keep the good stuff somewhere safe," he said. "I did," I said, and flicked the light, full bright. Emmett closed the door and set his back against it. Caleb's eyes jumped. Bench, vise, camera lens, bell, Emmett's hands. "You called cops?" he asked. "Not yet," Pearl said from the doorway, broom planted like a flag. "You have exactly 1 chance to turn around without a bracelet." Caleb laughed, then saw we weren't auditioning. He surged for the chisels. I stepped left and put my hand on the rack. Nothing dramatic, just enough. "You're not taking work from here," I said. "You never paid into it." He reached for the mallet instead, then thought better and went small. "I need cash, Dot. Dad's comp never came my way. You owe me." "We owe invoices," I said. "Itemize 1. He spun, caught sight of the camera's red blink, and made his choice. He lunged for the door. Emmett shifted 1 hip, and Caleb bounced off a body built for moving pews. The bell jangled again. Pearl didn't flinch. I raised my voice once. Just once. "Stop." Caleb stopped. Not because I'm loud, because the word landed like a clamp. Then I pointed to the bench where Emmett had set a sheet of paper earlier, folded once. "Read." Caleb glanced down. A printed restraining order request lay open, signatures blank, incident lines ready. Below it, 2 photographs, his boot print from the night of the fire, and tonight's match, ruler laid across both. The third photo was the lighter melted into a sad oval. I didn't say his name. The lens would. Your choice, I said. You sign a paper of your own. A no-contact agreement you break once, and the sheriff gets the whole show, and you pay back what the fire cost with hours here under my list. Sweep, stack, haul, outside of business, supervised, no tools bigger than a broom. 6 months. Or you walk now, and we file this, now. He stared at the floor, the photos, the bench, me. Caleb never loved decisions. They require owning outcomes. You'd make me clean your mess? You made the mess, I said. I'll make the rules. He looked at Emmett, gauging angles. Wrong man to guess on. He looked at Pearl, found a wall. He looked at me and tried one last play. You'll always think you're better. I think I'm busy, I said. Pick. He picked the only path that gave him a tomorrow. Fine, he muttered. 6 months. Then we're square. We'll be level, I said. Squares for joints. He signed. Pearl dated. Emmett took the camera card and slid it into a tin on the top shelf. Insurance, he said. Caleb swept that night, silent. 40 minutes of penance that didn't touch the ledger, but put a pencil to the page. When he left, I locked the door with 2 turns and listened to the tumbler say we were done for the day. Work swallows drama if you feed it right. The market wanted more boards. I switched to end grain patterns like checkerboards that looked like games and acted like armor. The evening class grew into 2 groups. I taught them to cut dovetails with a saw that obeyed pressure, not wishes. The first time a nurse snapped a pin and I said nothing, just handed her another blank and tapped the line, she grinned like she'd stolen time and paid back fear. Caleb came on schedule. Sullen, sleeves rolled, eyes cloudy. I gave him tasks that mattered, but didn't invite failure. Denail reclaimed studs, plain rough faces under a straight edge until the light disappeared, carry heavy, stack square. Talk less, lift more, I said when he tried to complain. He learned the rhythm of brooms, the ceremony of sweeping toward a dustpan without scattering what you've gathered. Pearl left him sandwiches and never asked a question he could turn into a snare. He tested the fence again on week 4, pocketed 2 sheets of sandpaper and a bottle of oil, small thefts that act like scouts. I checked his pockets at the door because I said I would. The oil came out. I took it back and added an hour to his count, written in big numbers where he could see. Math works, I said. He didn't argue. Small men hate clear ledgers. Spring lifted the town. June qualified for state finals in debate with a case on zoning that made 3 councilmen look like they'd lost their rulers. Mom hemmed graduation gowns steady as a metronome. Emmett brought over a jig he'd made for cutting identical angles fast and said, "Thought your box class could use it." I could. I did. The letterhead changed the following week. A lawyer from Camden, Ray's old employer's counsel, asking about potential claimants and dependents. They wanted signatures. They wanted history. I read the paragraphs twice, then put the letter under a chisel where wood couldn't bleed onto it. Pearl said, "They're fishing." I said, "We'll set our own hooks." I called the number from the school office during lunch because that line logs calls and turns strangers polite. "Dorothy Caldwell," I said. "Your letter arrived." The man cleared his throat into formality. "We're attempting to settle outstanding matters pertaining to Mr. Caldwell's injury and passing. Outstanding, I said. He left those, yes. Here are the facts. He didn't support. We did. If funds exist, they go to the person who paid and bled. Silence sized me up. We'll need documentation, he said. I have documents, I said. You'll have copies, not originals. You'll also have a letter stating who is not to receive a dime. And who is that? The man with the size 11 heel worn to the outside, I said, who tried to set fire to a shop and now sweeps it because he owes. Another silence, sharper. Ms. Caldwell, that sounds legal? Good. I wrote the letter that night with Pearl looking over my shoulder for commas and Emmett checking my nouns. I attached receipts, police incident numbers from the fire report Roland had quietly filed, and a page listing hours swept and tools replaced. I stapled it top left and mailed it certified. Caleb showed up at 7 and swept until 8 without asking what I'd posted. That's growth, of a sort. 2 Fridays later, a check came addressed to Mom. Not a king's ransom, but more than chickens and cardinals. We drove to First National. Mom signed with a hand that didn't shake. House roof first, she said. Then a second lock for the shop. Then a dentist. Agendas beat wishes. We paid them in order. Caleb saw the deposit receipt on the counter and tried to tilt the world. I get a slice, he said. You got the broom, I said. Keep it moving. He worked his 6 months and didn't burn anything else. On his last night, he stood in the doorway with the bell quiet and the floor clean. You're going to throw me out, he said, expecting the shove that made his life make sense. No, I said. You're going to walk out and not come back. Not angry, not hungry, just gone. He nodded once, like a man reading a sign he finally understands. Bridge out ahead. He left without slamming. The bell didn't ring. I took the camera down the next morning and put up a new sign. We fix what can be fixed. We name what can't. Then I sharpened chisels until they shaved hair and handed the first one to a kid who just learned how to follow a line with his whole arm. Trip line removed. Work line straight. On to the next cut. Part 5. Plumb and true. Summer hit hard and fast. Orders stacked. Stalls wanted cutting boards. The church asked for 2 lecterns. The county posted a bid for 12 courthouse benches. White oak, pegged tenons, no nails. Emmett and I won it because our estimate was short on adjectives and long on numbers. We milled stock at dawn, stickered boards by noon, and cut joinery when the heat dropped. June packed for college with a scholarship she wrestled out of a room full of men twice her age. Mom hemmed suit pants for half the town and stopped keeping the radio low. Pearl made lists and crossed them out like a game she always won. Trouble rolled up at midnight in a rental truck that wasn't ours. I was in the shop finishing a dry fit when headlights smeared across the window. 2 men jumped down, flung the doors, and started unloading bundles they called oak by yelling it loud. The wood thudded wrong, too light. Emmett stepped from the shadow with his straight edge. I took my awl and popped a clean divot. Pine, not oak. Wrong place, I said. County order, one man said, thrusting a clipboard. I checked the bill of lading. The vendor was Voss Supply out of Scranton, the runner-up on the bid. Cute. Unload on your own dock, I said, or reload and leave. No mystery dumps. They gambled on fast. We let them stack 3 bundles before I killed the breaker, and the yard went dark except for the rental's dome light. Emmett pulled the keys out of the ignition. Pearl's cowbell, back on duty, clanged from the side yard. The men froze. Pearl stepped out with the flashlight and the broom, the Honesdale Greeting Committee. "Sheriff," I said, flipping my phone's screen where the dialed number shone bright. The driver licked his lip. "We were told." "By whom?" I asked. He bit the rest of the sentence in half. Sheriff Dale arrived bored, left interested. He weighed a board in his hand, squinted at the invoice, then at the truck plate. "You boys are gonna wish it was just the wrong wood." He took statements. We took pictures. The men left with fewer excuses than they brought. The next morning I drove to the courthouse with 2 samples, our oak, their pine. I set them on the county clerk's counter and didn't smile. "If Voss handles procurement, your benches rot in a year," I said. The clerk sucked air through his teeth and waved me into the judge's chambers like I'd brought a subpoena. Judge Harrow was a lean man who hated wobble. I pushed the pine across his desk. "Tap it," I said. He did. It sounded like a lie. The oak sounded like a table you could count on through 3 marriages. He signed a stop order with a pen thick as a cigar, then wrote one more sheet for fun. Audit. Voss called at lunch. His voice was butter on a skillet. "Misunderstanding." "Math," I said. "Also felony, if we push." He tried the old dance. I put him on speaker with Emmett and Pearl in the kitchen, poured coffee, and laid out terms like a cut list. Pull your delivery, pay our time for handling, reimburse the county for the audit, and put in writing that you will not touch this contract again. He blustered. I set the phone down, waited out the steam, and picked it up when he ran dry. "Deal or sheriff?" I asked. He picked deal. Butter burns. We went back to building benches. Tenons from our mortiser fit like they'd been raised together. Emmett pegged each joint proud and trimmed flush in a single pull. I eased every edge the same. 2 swipes, feel, 1 more for luck. We stamped DMC and a date under each seat. Roland brought his students to lift and learn. "See this?" I said, tapping a mortise wall. "That tiny polish mark means your chisel was sharp and your hand was straight." Wood remembers. On delivery day, the courthouse smelled like fresh opinions. We set the benches in 2 rows, checked for rock, shimmed nothing. Judge Harrow came down, sat, and bounced once as if to test verdicts. "These won't creak under liars," he said. "Good." He signed off. The county paid on time, and someone from a paper took a photo where I accidentally looked like a person who knows how to hold a wrench. Voss tried a quieter route the week after. A plain envelope with 2 tickets to a ball game and a handwritten note. For future cooperation. I slid the tickets under a chisel and cut them both in half. I mailed the halves back with a short line. "We cooperate with specifications. Drama shifts targets when denied a door." It picked Pearl. She slipped on the porch step in a storm and bruised a hip. "Stupid," she said, mad at weather. I built a rail in an afternoon. Ash, 2 posts, a grip that fit her hand like a decision. Emmett bored the post holes straight. We set them plumb, and she tried it once, twice, then nodded like we'd fixed something big and obvious. "Charge me," she said. "You're not exempt," I answered. She paid in cherries in a ledger I wasn't allowed to see. The gallery in Philadelphia called again, this time for a solo wall. Functional work that carries its history. I sent 3 pieces that did not pretend. Patches visible, scarf joints proud, the repair line honored. At the opening, a man asked, "Why not hide the scars?" I said, "Because they're the strongest part now." He bought the shelf and asked for a second. Emmett wrapped it like a newborn and didn't comment. Caleb sent a postcard from Youngstown, a union card number scrawled on the back, a return address that sounded like a rooming house. No plea, no apology, no threat. He found a line to stand in, Pearl said, stirring stew. Sometimes that's the whole trick. I pinned the card to the shop corkboard next to a photo of June in a debate blazer and a receipt for 50 pounds of maple. Different kinds of proof share the same pushpin. The county asked for one more thing before fall: a witness stand repair. The old one wobbled under truth and lies alike. I took it apart in chambers while a clerk watched like I was disarming a bomb. The problem was simple: screws into end grain and prayer. I cut a housed dovetail that locked the uprights into the base and pegged it with white oak. When I set it back, the stand felt like a statement. Judge Harrow tested it with a palm. "Plumb and true," he said. "Exactly." On the way out, the prosecutor stopped me. "You ever think about teaching more than boxes? A county workshop? Tools, fixes, how not to get swindled by men like Voss?" I thought about the market, the shop, Mom's mending pile, Pearl's step, June's packing list. "One Saturday a month," I said. "Bring people who don't think they're handy." He grinned. "We have plenty." First session, 12 strangers, one room, a table of tools labeled in masking tape. I taught them to hang a door so it didn't scrape, to find studs without gadgets, to tell pine from oak with a fingernail and a nose. We practiced straight cuts with a handsaw, and the only mantra I allow: start easy, finish honest. At the end, I handed each a card that said, "Do not pay for promises, pay for work." They tucked it into wallets like armor. Mom's roof took new shingles. Her laugh came freer under dry ceilings. Pearl's rail silvered in the weather. Emmett left his straight edge in my shop and forgot to reclaim it. I didn't remind him. We ended summer the way we started, putting weight where it belonged. The benches held. The rail didn't wiggle. The shop bell rang only when we asked it to. Honesdale slept. You wanted quick cuts and clean joints. Here's the lesson I keep writing on the board. Keep your blades sharp, your lines visible, and your standards higher than any bid. Everything else is sawdust you sweep at closing. Part 6. On the Stand. Fall trimmed the leaves into a tidy mess, and work didn't slow. The courthouse benches took weight without complaining. My Saturday clinic filled with people who'd rather learn than get fleeced. And June left for college with a schedule color-coded like a battle plan. Then a deputy left a paper on my counter. Subpoena. Voss Supply wasn't done. The audit had bloomed into charges: fraud, attempted kickback, tampering with a county delivery. They wanted me on the record. I don't rehearse speeches. I lay out parts. Pearl cleared the kitchen table. Emmett brought folders. I numbered everything like a cut list. Photos of pine versus oak, the falsified bill, the midnight dump on camera, the returned baseball tickets sliced in halves, the county's stop order. I added one more page for fun: a diagram of a proper pagan tenon, labeled like a map. Jurors understand pictures faster than adjectives. The morning of testimony, I unlocked the shop at 6, sharpened a chisel until it whispered, then put it down and drove to the courthouse in a clean shirt with glue on the cuff anyway. Judge Harrow nodded when I took the oath. The prosecutor, young, eager, asked plain questions. I answered with nouns, measurements, dates, This is pine. This is oak. This invoice lies. The jury leaned in on the part where I tapped the boards and let their ears do the math. Voss's lawyer tried to turn me into a cranky craftswoman. Isn't it true, Ms. Caldwell, that wood is subjective? Trees aren't opinions, I said. They're species, also densities, cell structures, weight per board foot. Oak sinks a nail different. You can fool a clerk. You can't fool a mortise. He shifted to charm. I handed him the cut tickets in half. He didn't touch them. At recess, the deputy waved me aside. There's a witness you'll want to hear. I turned and saw Caleb in a clean shirt, jaw mauled by nerves, eyes sober. He'd been driving a rig out of Youngstown, it turned out. Part-time for a man who sometimes took side cash. He'd brought the rental that midnight. Yes, he admitted it. And then watched me turn the lights off and the tables on. I thought I could float it past her, he said to the room without looking at me. Nobody floats past Dot. The defense tried to smash him. He didn't break. He said the numbers, the phone calls, the name behind misunderstanding. It put Voss in the cab with him without saying the words front seat. When they asked why he was telling it now, he shrugged like a man who's tired of carrying a bad ladder. Because she made me sweep 6 months for the fire, he said. Because it was wrong. The jury understood that better than Latin. Verdict came fast. Guilty on the counts that mattered. The judge ordered restitution to the county and recommended a procurement class for half the town. Outside, reporters aimed microphones. I aimed for my truck. Caleb caught me at the step. We didn't hug. We aren't built like that. He said, "You'll never trust me." I said, "I'll trust the ledger. Keep it clean." He nodded and left with his hands empty, which is sometimes the only way to start. Back at the shop, a different trouble sat on my bench. A cracked maple cutting board from a customer who'd oiled it wrong and blamed the board. He wanted a refund. I gave him a lesson instead. Flattened the face, re-glued the joint, clamped with calls I'd made for exactly this, and sent him home with a card. Care is a habit, not a hack. He grumbled, then paid. Adults are just kids with receipts. The county asked me to run that procurement class. I built a curriculum like a tool tote. How to read a spec, how to tag a delivery, how to weigh a board and know when you're being sold air. Emmett taught a segment on fasteners that don't belong. Pearl covered paper trails that bite back. We filled the community room. Voss's name didn't cross my lips. His methods did, labeled don't. Mom's roof finished curing under a week of dumb sunshine. She moved her sewing machine closer to the window and started humming again. Pearl's hip stopped complaining after the rail and stubborn walking. Emmett kept leaving tools, by accident, a square, then a marking gauge, like breadcrumbs I had no intention of returning. I told him to stop. He said, "I'm bad at recollection," and smiled with one corner. The gallery asked for something with story. I sent a bench built from fire-scarred stock I'd refused to throw out. The burn lived along one edge like a shadow. I left it proud and inlaid a thin line of brass where the split had been. A collector asked why I didn't make it perfect. Perfect is a lie, I said. This is finished. On a Tuesday, a letter slid under the shop door with no stamp. Ray Caldwell Estate. Final notice. Estates don't scare me. Forms do. Pearl and I drove to Camden one last time, hands on the wheel at 10 and 2, stopping only for coffee. The clerk wore a tie that had outlived 3 bosses and an expression that said he'd seen worse families than ours. I put the paperwork on the counter, arranged by tabs, and told him what to pull, what to close, what to release. He stamped, stapled, sighed. "You're precise," he said. "I don't like rework," I answered. We left with 0 liabilities and a clean record I could frame if I were the framing type. At dusk, Emmett and I set the last courthouse bench in place for a small ceremony the county insisted on. Judge Harrow gave a speech that could hold its own weight, short and square. He tapped the bench. "Built to bear," he said. He asked me to say something. "I don't give speeches." I said, "We measured twice." On the way home, lightning spidered west again, but this time the shop windows glowed normal. Inside, on my bench, waited a small box with a ribbon. I don't like surprises. I opened it anyway. A brass badge the size of a matchbox, engraved Caldwell wood, with 2 tiny dovetails kissing in the middle. Emmett looked at the floor like a man who'd used up his words that month. "For your wall," he managed. I screwed it above the door where the bell hangs, plumb and true. The phone rang next morning. Not trouble, an invitation. The state wanted me to consult on vocational programs, rebuild the wood shops that budget cuts had starved. They offered a rate that didn't insult the craft, and a scope that might fix hands before they reached for cheap lies. I said yes to Saturdays, and call me if you need a clamp. Caleb mailed a crumpled receipt for his first 6 months' clean rent. Paid on time. A trucker's paycheck folded inside as proof. No note. Good. Notes get people in trouble. I ended the week the way I like, by unlocking the shop, checking the bench dog holes for dust, setting a fresh edge on a chisel, and writing 2 lines on the board for the evening class. Keep your witness stand solid. Keep your cut path honest. The bell chimed when a customer came in. The badge caught the light. Honesdale kept breathing. Work waited, square as ever. Part 7. Final Pass. Winter came on hard and clean. The state gig had me bouncing between shabby shop rooms, dead belts, dull bits, kids who thought a screwdriver was a brand. Saturdays I hauled in loaner tools and wrote on their boards the only rule that scales: start true or start over. Back home, orders kept a line at my door, and the badge Emmett made caught whatever light the day had left. The storm didn't announce itself. It just arrived. Ice first, then a shove of wind that made fences reconsider careers. Power blinked, came back, quit for good. Pearl's stove could run on sense alone. We put soup up and waited. The radio on fresh batteries said the river had shouldered past its banks. Honesdale's low streets took water like a poor bet. At dawn, the deputy hammered my door. "Courthouse basement's a mess," he said. Water in the evidence room, benches on the move. I took the shop keys, 2 come-alongs, a bag of wedges, and Emmett. We drove slow through streets that wore the river. The courthouse smelled like mud and old paper. Benches had skated sideways but held together. Joinery does its job even when floors don't. We winched them back along chalk lines I snapped on damp tile and wedged feet until the mops could catch up. Downstairs was worse. Shelving bowed, boxes sopped. A dehumidifier that wanted last rites. Judge Harrow stood in rolled cuffs, no robe, a man with a list and not enough hands. "Keep trials standing," he said. I pointed. "Raise what we save on sawhorses. Fans in pairs. Evidence tags on clotheslines." Emmett built frames out of ruined studs. I strung twine through the room like an honest spider, and we clipped bagged items to air. The clerk took photos for chain of custody and didn't argue when I moved his desk. Back at the shop, the bell rang nonstop. Neighbors with ruined doors, swollen drawers, chairs that had forgotten their shape. I triaged. Knockdown fixes first, glue work later. The Saturday class showed up unasked, sleeves up, eyes set. You wanted a lab, I told them. Here. We taught the town to pull hinge pins without tears, to plane a swell back down, to oil what swelled so it wouldn't crack later. It wasn't hero work, it was work. Caleb's rig brought pallets of sand and the kind of quiet help that doesn't wear a vest. He didn't knock, he moved. He stacked what needed stacking, hauled what needed hauling, and left receipts face up on Pearl's table. Paid. Mom sewed blankets into proper door snakes, business card pinned to each with a single straight stitch. Lydia Caldwell. Alterations. Dry hem, dry home. June called between classes to say her dorm had sprung leaks. She organized buckets like a general and laughed at her own weather. 2 days later, a different knock. The state coordinator in a wet trench coat. We lost 3 shop rooms to water, she said. Tools gone, kids idle. Can you salvage anything? I can salvage most things that pretend to be dead. We loaded my truck with loaners, raided the county's surplus, and drove. One school had benches warped like old songs. I pulled the worst, ripped them into straight again, and taught a dozen teens to laminate butcher block tops with glue and clamps that groaned like oxen. Another school's bandsaw had sulked into rust. We stripped it, cleaned bearings with kerosene, dressed the tires with sandpaper, crowned them by hand, and the blade finally tracked true. A boy who'd never been trusted with scissors fed a scrap through and grinned when it followed the line. It listens, he said. It always did, I said. Now you do. Back home, the river dropped and left misery. The gallery in Philly called. I let it ring out. The work in front of me didn't hang on walls. Emmett and I made rails for neighbors who suddenly understood stairs. Pearl ran a ledger on a yellow pad and shoved it out of my reach when the numbers tried to brag. Later, she said, we're not counting while it's still raining. Then the courthouse called again. The witness stand I'd rebuilt had taken a hit during the scramble. A bailiff's boot, a falling box, doesn't matter. And the lip had chipped. Come see it, the clerk said, embarrassed. I brought a small tool roll and a strip of matching oak. In chambers, the judge watched. I pared the break square, cut in a feather of new wood, planed flush, and left the repair line proud by a hair again. You never hide it, he said. Hiding's for guilt, I said. This is memory. He nodded. Proceed. The county invited me to speak at a luncheon that smelled like chicken and votes. I don't speak. I showed 2 boards instead. One straight, one twisted. This, I said, lifting the twist, is what happens when you rush and don't sticker between storms. I set down the straight. This is what you get when you plan for wait and time. Build like you trust tomorrow. They clapped like I'd sung. I went back to the shop and sharpened a chisel until it shaved the fuss off the day. Caleb came by at dusk with a bag of deck screws and that look men wear when words will try to make trouble. He set the bag down, eyed the badge over the door, then faced the bell. The foreman in Youngstown cheats the scale, he said. Short waits, long stories. He waited for me to declare a crusade. I didn't. I handed him a notebook. Dates, Loads. Who signed? Photograph the dial when it matters. He looked surprised, and then a little relieved. Revenge is loud. Records work. You'll never change, he said. Neither will math, I said. He took the notebook like a tool. June phoned with news that didn't belong to storm season. Internship, policy office, procurement reform. They want a template for small counties, she said. Send me your checklist. I faxed the one Pearl and I had scribbled into cents. Verify species by weight. Photograph deliveries. Pay net 15, not net forever. Never accept gifts with pitches. June replied with an emoji I don't understand, and a paragraph I did. We'll write it into law. When the town finally dried, the gallery tried again, polite and persistent. Bring something from the flood, they said. I sent a simple bench laminated from boards we'd rescued, stains sanded but not erased, a brass line down the center where two imperfect halves met and learned balance. In the catalog blurb, I wrote 8 words because that's all it needed. Repaired joints bear more than new wood. The last loose end arrived in an envelope stamped with a state seal, a commendation for service. Paper isn't a tool, but it can hold a wall straight if you slip it under a short leg. I slid it under Pearl's wobbly kitchen table and checked the rock. Gone. She laughed so hard she had to sit. On a clear morning, I unlocked the shop, hung the apron, and wrote new lines for the next class. Floods test joints. Fix what holds, replace what lies. Leave the scar proud enough to find. Emmett came in with 2 coffees, and that straight edge he never takes home. Market wants another run of boards, he said. Checker or brick? Brick, I said. People trust bricks. The bell chimed. A woman carried in a chair with 1 clean break. Good wood, honest damage. Can this be saved? She asked. I set it on the bench, measured the split, and nodded once. Yes, I said. We'll take a cleaner pass. That's the end of the first cut, and the beginning of whatever comes next. No speeches, no violins, just work that stands when the floor slips, a ledger with lines you can read, and a town that knows where to bring broken things. I cap the glue, I square the fence, I make the final pass slow, steady, true. Final. Grain runs through. Snow crusted the alleys, the kind that squeaks under boots and tells you if someone passed. I unlocked the shop at 6, chalked the board, and laid out parts for the day. 2 railings, a door that refused to hang square, a batch of end-grain bricks for market. Emmett sharpened while the coffee hissed. The bell rang twice. First a farmer with a broken gate latch, then a nurse with a desk drawer that swelled like a boast. We fixed both before 9. Conclusions aren't speeches. They're lists finished clean. The state pilot took root. 3 schools reopened their woodrooms with belts tight, guards in place, blades true. I left checklists taped inside every cabinet door. Unplug, guard, height, fence, push stick, eyes. Kids learned to hear a saw without fear and to stop when the cut chattered. A boy with patience like Winter squared his first frame. A girl who thought she wasn't handy dropped dovetails that clicked without persuasion. We hung their work on a wall that didn't lie. June brought home a draft bill marked up in 2 colors. Procurement reform? Counties under 50,000, she said, sliding a copy across my bench. 4 lines were mine word for word. Weigh deliveries, tag species, reject gifts, audit random. She didn't ask for pride. She brought the pen. We ate stew and edited verbs. Mom's hands slowed but didn't stop. She moved the singer to the window and stitched hems like borders on a map. When she tired, she tapped the table twice and I took the shift. One evening, she pressed a packet into my palm. The old letter I'd once smuggled in my shoe, flattened and whole. "You got where it pointed," she said. We filed it with the mortgage book and stopped opening that drawer for sentiment. It held deeds, not ghosts. Caleb kept his ledger. He logged loads with times, weights, signatures, and 2 photos per receipt. When his foreman tried to shave the dial, the notebook bit back. The yard installed a calibrated scale and lost 3 liars in a week. Caleb mailed me a single line on a torn envelope. "Scales are right. No flourish. Good." Pearl turned 80 the way she approaches rain. Coat on, chin up, broom ready. I built a second rail along her back steps and cut a shallow groove down the grip for her thumb. "Unnecessary," she claimed, then used it twice and called it sensible. She finally let me repay the ledger with interest. A new door, hung plumb with a latch that clicks like a promise. She pretended not to notice the brass plate I inlaid at hand height. Pearl's house, open on purpose. Work stacked as usual. The church needed a baptismal cover. I made it from ash with a cross lap grid that lay flat and lifted easy. The county called for a witness stool for minors. I built it low, steady, and warm to the hand. The market wanted more boards. I laminated brick patterns until my fingers smelled like beeswax and thyme. I kept one for Pearl's kitchen and didn't put it on the ledger. The gallery pushed for a retrospective. I sent one piece and a note. "We build to be touched." It was the flood bench, brass seam proud, stain faint as memory, feet shod in rubber so no floor yelled. It sold to a museum that swore people could sit. If they lie, I'll go take it back. I set my own papers in order, shop keys cataloged, supplier list clean, a will that left Caldwell Wood to the work, not the name. The clause read like a cut list. Keep classes free on Thursdays, prioritize repairs for neighbors before shows, display the rules where they can't be ignored. Emmett added one line in pencil. "Trust the line, not the story." We inked it. A kid from my Saturday clinic, quiet, careful, soft shoes, showed up daily until it wasn't showing up. It was work. I taught him blade voices, the way oak talks different from cherry, how glue wants pressure, not panic. He stopped asking if he was allowed and started asking where the straight edge lived. "There," I said, pointing to Emmett's gift. "Use it like you mean it." The courthouse called one last time for a small thing that wasn't small. The jury box handrail felt rough. I pulled a block plane from my bag and kissed the edge twice, then 3 times, until the rail lost its bite but kept its grip. Judge Harrow ran a palm along it and nodded. "Most people sand until nothing remains," he said. "You stop early." "Early is honest," I answered. "After that, you're lying." Winter cracked, then let go. On the first clear day, I hauled every chisel into the light and honed them until they shaved hair without grabbing. Emmett hung the shop door open. Pearl brought coffee that tasted like the last cold morning. Mom set a hem, tied off the thread, and said, "Enough for today." We agreed. I wrote the final set of lines on the board for anyone who came after. Measure twice. Cut once. If it squeals, back off. If it hides, name it. If it breaks, repair proud. Pay what's owed. Take what's earned. Lock the door. Leave the light. Then I did what I always do. I checked the fence for square. I set the blade just high enough to work and no higher. I push the stalk through steady, both hands firm, eyes on the line, listening for the right kind of quiet. The cut came out clean. I eased the edge, 2 swipes and 1 for luck, blew the dust, and set the piece at the rack marked ready. That's the whole of it. No miracles, no violins, nothing a ledger can't bear. A cabinet of tools, a town that brings you broken things, a family held together by rails and rules instead of fear. Grain runs through. You follow it or you fight it. I followed. I hang the apron. I sweep to the pan without scattering what I collected. I kill the outer lights, leave the little one over the bench burning. Just enough to say, we're closed for now, not finished.